Sarah has a PowerPoint I looked through, and it looks very cool. We're going to sort of be trained just to do what they did on the video by the looks of it. Sarah's a member at St. John. If you remember, we partnered with Marine Search as St. John and many other churches to help purchase a ultrasound for Positive Options, which is really cool, a better one, right? Yeah, so that they can really see those images of the baby. So I won't take up any more of her time, but I would say, thank you for being generous on the door offering. If some of you are moved to support her on an ongoing basis, she will need that as she begins full-time work with Protect Life Michigan. They, like many other organizations, are, I would say, very aggressive in staffing, and so they use their people to help fund their own position, if I can say that. So you can talk to her about that afterwards. Do you need something passed out?
Oh yeah, I have some guided notes that you can take along with you while we go through this training so that you can remember all of it.
Great. Well, let's begin with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for Sarah and her ministry and all of the ways that we've been supporting life. This is another. Help us become better equipped to be life disciples. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, thank you guys for all coming over here. And I really honestly am just blown away by how much you guys really, really care about this issue at this church, and that is just so wonderful to hear. So we're going to get started. So would you mind raising your hand if you've ever had a conversation about abortion with someone who disagrees with you? All right, maybe about half of us or something. Was that a difficult conversation to have, an easy conversation to have? Yeah, probably not very easy. What makes talking about abortion so difficult? Just shout it out.
Emotionally charged.
Yeah, very emotionally charged. People are very passionate about it. It touches on a lot of different issues, right? It touches on things like laws, medicine, religion, poverty and foster care, so many different things under the sun, and that just makes it really difficult to have that conversation, especially when you disagree. But at the end of this presentation, you'll be much more confident in having these conversations, and so that they actually can be productive ones, where you're not just saying things back at each other. It's something that I forgot to mention earlier, but of all the conversations that Protect Life Michigan has with just people on the street or on campuses, 26% of people that we talk to will change their mind on the spot and admit to it, which always blows my mind because I can be somewhat of a stubborn person. So I know that if I were to be talking to a random person about something like this and I were to change my mind, it would be very difficult for me to admit that. But so many people do just say that to us right there. So I can only imagine the true impact that we have throughout all of this. And so this training that we're about to go through, this works. And I've seen it. All right, I've got to find the clicker. All right, so before we teach you the tools, we're going to talk about why we bother to learn pro-life apologetics. That's a common theme that we have to Protect Life Michigan. It's just starting with why we're doing what we're doing. So first of all, abortion is just the greatest injustice of our time that we're facing right now. And we know this for 3 reasons. First of all, the sheer number of victims. There are over 2,300 children killed by abortion every single day in the US alone, which is a massive, massive heartbreaking number. Second of all, the complete and utter defenselessness and vulnerability of the victims. In other injustices, people might be able to run or hide or fight or have someone stand up for them, but the unborn can't do that. They are stuck inside the womb of their mother, and if she wants to kill them, they will be killed. And finally, the fact that this injustice is not only tolerated, but it is widely accepted and even celebrated in our society. You don't look at other injustices like poverty or hunger or something. No one is pro-hunger, but people are pro-abortion. So we really have our work cut out for us here. And so if we want to end this injustice, we need to expose it and change public opinion. The unborn don't have a voice, but we do. And so we should use our voice to speak on their behalf. Changing minds on abortion is both possible and necessary if we want to see this end in our lifetimes. So the goal of this presentation is to teach you what we believe about abortion and why, and how to share that message in truth and love. Truth meaning that we should never compromise on our beliefs in speaking up on the unborn, and we're not going to apologize for doing so. But also in love, meaning that we're never going to attack someone's character or dignity for the people that disagree with us. We're going to take their concerns of abortion-minded women and other people seriously. We're not going to judge or condemn people who've had abortions, even though we condemn the act itself. So today we're going to cover the pro-life position, a conversation strategy on how to focus on our key question, and then also we're going to prove the humanity of the unborn using both biology and philosophy. So firstly, the pro-life position, we're going to use a simple syllogism, which is a logical, are you extras? You need another one? I don't have that anymore. Yeah. So firstly, the pro-life position, we're using a syllogism, which is a logical concept of premise 1, premise 2, and if these are both true, then the conclusion must also be true. So the pro-life syllogism is that it is wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. And then secondly, that abortion intentionally kills innocent human beings. And then finally, that therefore abortion is wrong. So this is a pretty simple, straightforward claim, and it's rooted in the concept of equal human rights. Notice we aren't making a religious argument, like all life is sacred. We aren't making a subjective, emotional argument, like women regret having abortions. Statements like that might be true, but they won't be persuasive to everyone. At the center of this debate is the fact that if the unborn are human beings, it would be wrong to kill them for any reason, under any circumstance. So in order for the pro-life argument to be wrong, it would require that one of these premises be wrong. Most people will argue that killing innocent people is okay, no matter what their religious views are. So typically, they would try and argue against premise 2, that abortion intentionally kills innocent human beings. So therefore, our disagreement hinges on the key question: what is the unborn? As Greg Kokel from Stand to Reason says, if the unborn is not a human being, no justification for abortion is necessary. However, if the unborn is a human being, no justification is adequate. When asking what is the unborn, the answer will fall into one of these two categories. Either they are one of us and they're valuable human beings with rights, or they are not one of us and they are disposable, and it might as well be up to the woman to do whatever she wants, including killing them. Most of the time, our job is to show that the unborn are one of us. They're a human being with human rights. And if they are one of us, it's like Kokel said, no justification for abortion is adequate because there's never an adequate reason to kill an innocent person. There are some advanced pro-choice arguments that grant for the sake of argument that the unborn is a person, but the majority of pro-choice people feel that the unborn are not one of us. But we can talk about those later if you would like. So in order to persuade these people, we need to focus on defending the humanity of the unborn. So before we can answer this question, we need to help the person that we're talking to see that this is actually the question that needs to be answered. Most pro-choice people you speak to are primarily focused on the woman and the circumstances surrounding her choice. What if she's poor? What if she's too young? What if she was raped? The pro-choice person likely doesn't want to focus on the unborn. They've already assumed that they aren't a person like us. And worrying about a meaningless clump of cells when a woman's well-being is at stake, that's ridiculous. This is why we often talk past each other. Pro-life people say, don't you care about babies? And pro-choice people say, don't you care about women? To have a productive conversation, we need to bridge the gap in focus. We want to walk them from point A, ignoring the unborn and caring only about women, to point B, understanding that the question of what is the unborn is essential to the debate. Once we've bridged the gap, only then we can have a conversation about whether the unborn are human beings and why. So how can we guide them to this key question without dismissing their concerns about women? So we will do that on the next slide. So we have a conversation strategy that goes find common ground, give an analogy, and ask a question. And we learned this strategy from another organization that works like us. They're called the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Work with them a lot. We want to make sure that what we're doing is effective. And so we'll demonstrate how this conversation strategy works using one of the most common and extremely difficult topics. But it's pivotal that we discuss it because it's a case that people bring up all the time. To pro-choice people, this seems like the most obvious case of women needing abortion. And to pro-life people, this is a case that people often struggle with and may even make an exception for. So some of you in this room may not even be convinced that abortion is wrong in the case of rape. If that's you, stick with us. Like I said, this is the toughest case. We feel so much compassion for a woman who's gone through something horrible, and giving her a way out of this pregnancy seems compassionate. But remember our syllogism. Abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills innocent human beings. And it's always wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Therefore, abortion is wrong. So despite all the difficulties surrounding this case, which we'll discuss in a moment, we know that the unborn are children conceived in rape, that even when they're conceived in rape, they're still human beings. All right. So starting with common ground. Rather than just like jumping into the argument, we're going to take a moment with the person that we're talking to just see where we already agree on something. Because we don't want to just like dismiss their concern to just go straight into what about the baby. It's not going to be very helpful. So we're just going to build some trust with them and show them that you're compassionate, that you actually do care about women. Because you know that you care about women, but they might not think so. I'll give you an example of how that works in a second. But also when you're building common ground with the person in front of you, make sure to be sincere. Don't say something like, well, yeah, of course I care about women, and then just like move on to the next thing. They can tell when you're lying, and also just don't lie in general. I think that's a good thing that we should do. Yeah, not good to lie. But that shouldn't be difficult because I know that all of you guys do actually care about women. But it's an important step to not skip. So in our example about rape, I'll say I'm talking to someone and I ask them what they think about abortion. And they come up to me and they say, well, I think women need abortion in the case of rape. This is how I might respond. You bring up one of the most challenging circumstances. Rape is one of the worst things I know about. An innocent woman has been violated. There's going to be physical and emotional trauma from this experience. I think the rapist needs to be punished to the full extent of the law. What he did was very wrong. And this woman deserves all the support and resources she needs. Regardless of what happens with her pregnancy, the rape itself can never be undone, and this is horrible. Notice that I just spent that time just talking to her, or whoever brought this up, to share that this actually is a horrible thing, and I really, really do care. And I think that it's wrong, and I want rape to stop, regardless of what else. This is another injustice against an innocent human being that is not okay. And so if the other person sees that, oh, wow, they actually don't just not care about women who've been raped, they really, really do. And then they can start to think, but they're still against abortion, so what's up with that? And then we can start going to the next thing.
So do you want to take questions as you go or not?
We'll do them as we go.
So do you find that in these examples, women are more effective witnesses than men?
It honestly depends on the person that we're talking to. It can really go either way. Most people will listen if it's a guy talking, but every once in a while someone is going to be, well, you're just a guy, so you shouldn't be able to say anything about it. And there's always the counter of, well, this is a human rights injustice. No matter how you're looking at the issue of abortion, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, this is about human rights. Because pro-choice people say that having an abortion, being able to do whatever you want with your body is a right. And I think that as human beings, we need to be able to stand up for human rights, no matter like what side we're on. Of course, we should be on the side of actual human rights. But that men should still stand up in the issue of abortion. Now, sometimes people just don't want to hear it, and so there's probably going to be a girl nearby anyway to just take over the conversation, at least when we're doing our outreach. But I think for most people, they're not really focusing on you when you're having a conversation. They see a person, and they definitely want to see that you care about women, and so you should make that clear. But they're not really trying to go into all the ins and outs of who you are. You're making the pro-life argument for them. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so once we've built common ground with our person, we are going to give them an analogy. And you might remember this from the video in the sermon. Max actually pretty much just went through this like textbook, like with the textbook analogy. Yeah. So then we're gonna make an analogy to help them see the moral logic about what's going on here. So we're gonna compare this hard situation with a similar situation. And analogies are great because they use the principle of show, don't tell. This is why we don't just give our syllogism and leave it at that. People grasp the logic a lot better through stories. So the easiest way to create an analogy that is parallel to abortion is with a strategy called trot out a toddler. Basically, we take the same situation that someone is bringing up to justify abortion, like in the case of rape, and we just apply it to a toddler and to see if it still justifies killing humans when the human is a toddler. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. So trot out the toddler isn't the only analogy that you can use. It could be a personal story or a comparison to something in history, but trot out the toddler is probably going to be the easiest thing to do. But also, when you're going to set up this analogy, you want to brace them for it. Don't just be like, yeah, rape is wrong, and you go through that whole thing we were just talking about, and then be like, what about if the kid was 2? If you're the pro-choice person, that just came out of nowhere. Like, I don't know what you're trying to do here. So if you say, hey, like, you build the common ground, and you say, can I give you an analogy? Just that like quick sentence right there is going to make it feel a lot more like a conversation rather than a debate, because we're trying to have conversations with just people. We're not trying to yell at each other. That won't be very effective. Think about it like for yourself. If someone just came up to you and started, you know, being a little like yelling at you and just saying like, what about this, this, and this? You're probably not going to listen to them very much. And so we need to take that into consideration. So yeah, brace them for analogy, just a quick sentence. Yeah, can I give you an analogy? And then it makes them more part of the conversation too. So an example in our case of rape analogy is I have an analogy for the situation that I would love to hear what you think about. So if there's a woman who was raped but decided to have her child, now her child is 2 years old and he's starting to resemble his father, this causes the woman severe PTSD, anxiety, and depression. She can barely live with herself, let alone take care of her child. Would it be okay in this situation, because of the trauma of being raped, for the woman to take the life of her 2-year-old? Again, this is the exact analogy that was used in the video, so you can see how that works. But the point of, yes?
What you've seen in your experience, are there women that would actually say, yes, it's okay to kill that child?
People, I think I have had like one person, and I've had, I don't know how many hundreds of conversations I've had with people, but I've probably had like one person say that, that they think it would be okay. The vast, vast majority. And I think that the people who do say, they're like, oh yeah, I still think it's okay to kill that child, they probably don't really believe it, and they can kind of see like where you're going, and they don't want to admit to the conclusion, so they kind of just throw it off there. But it's usually people that say that the people who want to end suffering, and so if they want to end suffering, they end the sufferer kind of thing. But we know that that's not okay. We want to end the suffering. The person still deserves to live. But yeah, so putting this into that spotlight will help. But yeah, most people are going to give the response of, well, no, of course not, and you can build more common ground there. Common ground doesn't just need to happen right at the beginning. It can happen throughout the conversation. So then finally we can end asking a question. And whenever possible in conversations, we ask questions to help them think through the conclusions themselves. It is much more convincing if the person you're speaking to is able to draw their own conclusion rather than you telling them what the answer should be. And that just kind of, a quick aside there, is that when we're having conversations with people, we do want to seek to change their minds, but we can't convince them. We actually can't change their mind. They have to change their own mind. And well, the Holy Spirit also changes their mind. But we are called to give them good reasons why they should. Anyway, so we're showing them to help them draw their own conclusion. So after trotting out a toddler, the question sounds like this. If we can't kill a born child for this reason, why can we kill an unborn child in the same situation? So by asking this question, we're showing the logic. The circumstances they bring up, while difficult, wouldn't justify killing a human being. That's obvious when we're talking about a 2-year-old, no matter how much compassion and sadness we feel for the woman. So why is it different when the child isn't born yet, just because they're younger? People have replied to this in one of 2 ways. If they were already somewhat convinced that the unborn are human, like maybe they're generally pro-life but just held this exception, then this question might be enough for the logic to click and for them to agree that abortion in this case is wrong. However, if the person is pro-choice, it's likely they will respond to this question by saying, well, that's different. A fetus isn't the same as a toddler. Then they'll proceed to explain why killing the unborn seems okay to them, maybe because the unborn is in her body or because they don't have rational thought yet or any number of reasons. So in that case, you might be thinking, wait a second, this didn't work. We did all of that just for them to still think that abortion is okay. But actually, this is exactly what Trial of the Toddler is meant to do. Notice we never actually made an argument about the unborn being human. We merely made it clear that if the unborn is human, the situation doesn't justify killing them. Big if. So the natural response was for them to say, well, I don't think they're human. Great. That's what the disagreement is, which is a question of whether the unborn are human or if they aren't. And so we've brought them to, from this hard circumstance is why women need abortion to saying the unborn are the kind of thing that can be killed because of X. And that is the key disagreement that we need to discuss. So either way, no matter how they respond to it, we are now talking about the unborn and focusing on our key question, what is the unborn? Example of this in our situation is if a mother can't kill her toddler because he's a reminder of rape, why can she kill an unborn child because he's a reminder of rape? And again, people will probably say, well, that's different. A fetus isn't the same as a two-year-old. Another example using this strategy is with foster care. You should probably be able to see it, but I'll read it out anyway. So someone says women need abortion because their kid is just going to end up in foster care and they're going to suffer there. So I'm going to bring it up and say, well, our foster care system is incredibly flawed. Many children have experienced abuse and terrible living systems, just period. Like that's true. Secondly, I have an analogy that I would appreciate your thoughts on. Imagine there's a 10-year-old child in the foster care system. All of those concerns came true for him. He feels unloved, unwanted, and that his life is pointless. Would it be okay to kill this child to spare him suffering? And they'll say no. Well, of course not. That would be awful. So if we couldn't kill a born child who is currently suffering in foster care, why can we kill the same child years earlier simply because they might end up in foster care in the future? All right, so quick recap, conversation strategy. What is the first part? Building common ground. Great. What's the second one? Analogy and question. Great. Not that you have to have all this memorized, but it can be helpful. All right, so then now that we've focused on the key question, we need to talk about how to actually answer it. So we're going to use biology to prove that the unborn are actually human beings. Then we're going to also prove through philosophy that they are equal to the rest of us. Yes?
There's a grabbable sign up front, so if you want to grab that and shut me off, that's fine. I just want you to know that what I've been telling you for some time is on the verge of being happening in Michigan, and that's assisted suicide. That's next on their docket in the liberal legislature in Michigan. And if it gets as bad as Canada, you could actually have people who will say that the 10-year-old should be allowed to end his life. And that's a whole different, ball of wax there. So just in your apologetics, we're going to have to deal with some of that thinking in the near future.
Yeah, you're right. That is something that is probably going to be coming up in the next few years. But at least when you frame it of like it's still not super, super popular, but it is getting worse, so we're going to have to take that into account. But most of the time when we're talking to someone, they're not going to say that it's okay to kill that kid. All right, so again, answering the key questions, proving the unborn are biologically human and philosophically equal. So, proving that they're human, this one is actually pretty easy to do. Just shows that they are literally biologically human beings. And we can prove this, that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole. Distinct meaning that they have their own unique DNA. They are literally a separate organism, separate thing than their mother. They're not simply a part of her like another kidney or something. Secondly, they are living, they're growing, they respond to stimuli, they're metabolizing nutrients, for any of you biology nerds out there. They meet the scientific criteria for being alive. And then finally, they're whole, meaning that they aren't just part of a human being, like skin cells that I have in the back of my hand, they fall off all the time. That's not me, they're just parts of me, but the unborn are full human beings. They're not missing anything where they can become human. They're already a whole human being again. Their DNA is dictating their own development from within, and all they need to mature is time, nutrition, and the proper environment. All the same things that humans at any stage need to continue living and growing. All right, so yeah, there are no reputable pro-choice scholars that reasonably try to argue against human biology. This is pretty settled science. You might need to help pro-choice people see that this is not the controversial part of the abortion debate. You could say it seems like if the unborn are growing, they must be alive, and if the unborn have 2 human parents, they must be human. That's kind of like the short version of this. So if they're asserting something like no one knows when life begins, there's a good chance they mean to be speaking philosophically. You might even ask, do you mean no one knows when a human life exists biologically, or do you mean something more philosophical, like no one knows when a person begins? And if they say the latter, that's good, you can move the conversation to the meat of the debate, which is whether they're persons or not. But yeah, most people agree on this. You might have to specify on that a little bit more. But the real interesting conversation is, well, we have this human thing that's growing, but is it actually equal to us? Are they human beings deserving of rights? Speaking of, we argue from the standpoint of human rights. So often people are willing to accept the fact that the unborn are biologically human, but have a hard time believing that an embryo or fetus is actually viable enough to warrant protection, valuable enough. In order to address this, we want to focus on the idea of human rights. And human rights is something that almost everyone believes to be extremely important, especially in like the Gen Z generation and all that. And so it can be a good place of agreement with pro-choice people. So the problem with abortion is that it denies certain human beings their basic human rights. Sometimes simply asking some strategic questions can help people see this obvious issue. So here are some questions from the Canadian Centre of Bioethical Reform. Do you believe in human rights? They're most likely going to say yes. Great, build some common ground there. Who should get human rights? Well, all human beings. And if the unborn are human beings and all humans should get human rights, doesn't that mean that abortion is a human rights violation? You saw that in the video. That's pretty much exactly what Max went through. And so notice that rather than making an argument ourselves, we're asking them a series of questions and helping them to see that the conclusion of their beliefs is that the unborn deserve human rights just like everyone else. And sometimes just this simple line of questioning is enough to help show people that treating some human beings as less valuable than others is always wrong. Other times people will still have objections, but establishing this allows you to continue to appeal to human rights throughout your conversation. So again, like in the video, this was pretty much all that Max had to do to convince the people that abortion is wrong. So like, well, they're biologically alive, they're human beings, killing them is wrong. But people will still have arguments on that. They still might say, well, they're not really valuable like the rest of us. Human rights should be for people, and the unborn, they're human, but they might not be people. So that's where we get into the philosophy part. But I promise it's not too heavy into the theories. So many times, so I'm trying not to repeat myself. Yeah, so many times when people are sharing why they think that abortion is not a human rights violation, they will bring up a series of differences between us and the unborn. They can't even think yet. They're just clump of cells. They're relying on their mother's body to survive. And they're correct. We are different from the unborn in these ways. However, none of these differences are morally significant. They're differences that don't change our value. So let's go through these different categories, because all the differences between us and the unborn will fall into one of these categories. First of all, size. What's an example where people are comparing us and the unborn based on size? Yeah. You're good.
So,
yes.
This is available to us, though, in your presentation online, correct?
This one is not.
This one isn't, okay. However, for you and us, this is going to be on our YouTube site. Do you need us to take it off or not?
I think that should be.
It'll be okay. And you can utilize this later if you want to show people what you do.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, so size differences between us and the unborn. This one is probably going to be like, it's hard to think of, and then when you hear it, you'll be like, oh, duh. Maybe when people say, well, the unborn, they're just a clump of cells, right? Or they're like, well, they're really tiny, you know? It's like, they can't be the same as us, like they're one cell. You know, people bring that stuff like that up all the time. But we know that this actually isn't what gives us our value, because look around the room, we are all different sizes. Like, I'm a pretty short person. If I'm sitting next to a tall person, we wouldn't say that they have more rights than me. We have the same amount of rights because we are human beings with equal human rights. So we know that size doesn't really make sense to be a judge for that. And you can bring all these up in a conversation with someone. Secondly, there's level of development. This is a big one. The guys in the video actually used this. You guys remember any of that? Or just anything else that you can think of?
The video that they say when they can form memories or something along those lines?
Yes, like when they are able to form memories. The other guy said if they have a brain. There's a whole bunch of other different ones you can go into. Anybody think of any?
When they can sustain their own life.
Right, sustain their own life, like when they're viable, or having a heartbeat. That's another one. It's just some sort of sign of development. Oh.
Because, I mean, that's a big one.
Oh, that's a huge one. Yeah, the pain is also part of that. Yeah, it's basically, you know, age. It's some point within there that people draw the line based on, well, I feel like this is when they're a person. They're usually talking about level of development.
I don't really think they're viable until about age 18.
Right, I mean, we'll talk about that a bit more in the degree of dependency, but right, the level of development, right, so even around this room, some of us are more developed than others, right, but we still all have the same value. And if our value was based on how developed we are, then the older people in this room would have more fundamental rights than the younger people in this room. And we know that just doesn't make any sense. Then there is environment. This one is another weirdly obvious, but also hard to think of one.
Well, it's where you are, so you can take one out because it's unborn. Can we take one out because they live in poverty? Or because they're not a United States citizen? Or
Right, yeah, and so specifically with an example of like pregnancy and abortions, that the unborn are just inside the woman's body. Like when they're inside of her, they don't have value, but if we were to take them out, then they would suddenly have value. Well, that doesn't really make sense. There's nothing like super special about like just being moved from one place to another. Like, you know, we use birth as like a measure of, well, now we get to meet you, and that's a huge thing for when you get to meet your child or your grandchild. But that doesn't mean that they just suddenly started living. They suddenly became more valuable. And so another example of this, like you were saying with like being a citizen or something, is during the time of like slavery in the Underground Railroad, people were trying to move them specifically like from the US into Canada, right? You had to cross this line and then people couldn't bring you back to your master, so like the fugitive slave law and all that stuff. If you crossed this line, suddenly you were in Canada, you had more value than in the United States. But like walking back and forth across this line, am I changing my value in any way? No, I'm just crossing a line or not. So your environment also doesn't determine how valuable you are. All right, finally, degree of dependency. You're talking about this, Pastor. It's the point of viability, that they're too dependent on the woman to actually be their own valuable human being. But this one, as we can also see, doesn't really make sense. Because when you are even a born child, you are still very, very dependent on your parents. People might talk about, well, no, I meant like physically dependent on someone else. And it's like, well, they still are. And if you look at like newborn babies too, before formula was invented, they literally needed their mother's body to survive. But I think we can all recognize that newborns, even in that case, still have value just because they're human beings. And another example of like the degree dependency thing is like my dad, he is a diabetic, and so he relies on insulin more than the rest of us do to survive. But that doesn't mean that he's worth less than you or me. Again, all the same thing. So something that all of these differences have in common is that they're all something on a spectrum, right? Like you can be bigger or smaller than someone. You can be more developed or less developed. You can be in the womb or halfway out of the womb or something, or you can be more dependent or less dependent on someone. And if we were to base our value on any of these things, then it would follow that that our value is also on a spectrum, correlating to that. But again, that's not true. We all have equal human rights just based on the fact that we're human. We all have equal human rights, and human beings are so different from one another, which is so beautiful. We all have different abilities and talents, and we look different from one another. But what makes us valuable is just the fact that we're human beings. And so that's the only thing that we can base that on. All right. So to recap, the pro-life position, does anyone remember what that was? You should all have the notes for it, so I'm not going to give you this one. Just shout it out. Yep, it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Someone else, what's the next part of the pro-life position?
That abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being.
Yep, and the last one, everybody should be able to shout this one out.
Abortion is wrong.
There you go. Well, that was not everybody, but yeah.
So this apologetic intentionally is not religious. Can you speak to, do you ever get into the sacredness from that standpoint? I'm thinking you're trying to be as effective as possible with all audiences.
Yes, you absolutely can bring faith into it, but it depends on the person you're talking to. So if I was going to talk to some person on a college campus who, they're atheists, they hate Christians, they hate the Bible, and I would be like, well, you know, the Bible says that all human, they're not going to care. They're going to be like, shut up, leave me alone, you're crazy, I'm still pro-abortion. And so we have to reach them another way. And human rights, we all agree on this in our society, or like most of us, that human rights exist and that we should protect them, even that pro-abortion person who hates the Bible. And so if we can reach them on that, no matter what walk of life people are in, no matter what political beliefs they have or religious beliefs, you can still be pro-life, and you should be. If you subscribe to human rights at all, you should be. But where faith comes into it is, where do we get these human rights? Where do they come from? They come from God. You can't really avoid that. And so I've seen people who have been atheists and pro-choice become pro-life due to conversations like this, and then become Christian because they realized, wait a second, where is this all coming from? But also, you can still use faith in arguments with people who are also religious, because there are a lot of people who are Christians but they're pro-choice. You can absolutely bring the Bible into it, though oftentimes those people have often already convinced themselves that God is okay with abortion. So if you use something secular like this, they can start to see it, and then you can bring God into it more. So it really just depends on the person you're talking to and how it goes about. But this is something that, again, we can all agree on no matter what. But ultimately, no matter whether we're citing the Bible in our verses, this is for God. This ministry is to protect God's children, and everything we do, whenever we're having a conversation, it's all ultimately to lead people to Christ and away from sin and death and the devil. So, hope that makes sense. Okay, great. All right, so recap again of the conversation strategy. I already had you do it earlier, but the first one is, first part, build common ground. Second, analogy and perfect. Yeah, not that you have to super memorize all of these, but it is, again, very helpful to just recap it too. All right, and then we prove the humanity unborn using biology and philosophy. Biology, through showing that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole. The short version is, well, they're growing and they have human parents, have their own separate DNA, they're living human beings. And then philosophically, you base it on human rights, that all human beings get human rights, no matter differences that we have between each other. And then those differences are in the acronym SLED. What does the S stand for? Size. L is? E. D. none of those differences are morally significant, or human rights is just based on the fact that we're humans. All right, so some conversation tips when you're actually out having conversations, and I modeled these throughout the presentation, and so did Max in the video. But I'm going to point them out explicitly here. So first of all, don't be afraid to be kind. This isn't a debate that you're trying to win, it's a discussion. You don't have to have the quickest wit, and you don't have to be right all the time. Relax and be friendly. Our tool of building common ground and pointing out areas of agreement is a great way to make the conversation positive and friendly. Even when I have conversations with people, like on Grand Valley's campus, for example, who they don't change their mind. And that's okay. If we change 26% of the minds of people that we talk to, that's still another 74 who don't. And that's okay. It's not our job to change their mind, but it's our job to advocate for the unborn. But even when we have that conversation, you can change people's minds about how they think about pro-life people. Because a lot of pro-choice people will see pro-life people and go, they hate women. But if you go up and you show that you actually really do love women and that you are, clear and just nice when you're having the conversation, they go, oh, hey, maybe there is something to think about this. And the next person they talk to, like, oh yeah, maybe they'll be more open to hearing about it the next time. But I really do love running into people that I've talked to on campus before, because I am still a student for the next month. So I see people all the time that I've talked to before, and they're like, oh, hey, I really loved that conversation that we had. Or when we're having a conversation, they're about to leave, and I'm like, thank you for having this conversation with me, even if they didn't change their mind. So just always be kind. And also, you should be kind anyway, right, Pastor? All right. Secondly, you're listening, clarifying questions. Don't assume that you know what the other person believes. If they're making vague statements, ask for clarification. I want to understand your view better. What do you think? Why do you think that? Or I've heard people define pro-choice different ways. What does that mean to you? Genuinely seek to understand their argument so that you can respond to the right things. And we demonstrated this while talking about SLED and asked specific questions like, when you say clump of cells, what do you mean? Why do you think sentience is a thing that gives you value? And the thing about clarifying questions, though, is that you can honestly just go through your whole conversation asking clarifying questions. That's happened before, though sometimes it's annoying, so don't just constantly be, what do you mean, what do you mean, what do you mean? But I've had a conversation with someone before where they were just kind of thinking through their position for the first time, and I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Or kind of saying, well, what about this? And not even trying to act like I knew the right answer. I was like, well, that was interesting about what you just said. And then they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And they talk through it, and that person had a mind change right there. Again, it's an example of how people change their own minds. So don't be afraid to clarify and genuinely listen. You don't have to have your next answer ready. When the other person is talking, you'll be like, okay, all right, so they're bringing up something, I'm gonna bring up common ground, okay. Then I do that, and then they're saying something else, I'm like, okay, analogy. Well, what analogy am I gonna use? Don't do that. Just take a second and genuinely listen to what they're saying. And the more that you it doesn't matter if you stutter when you're talking to the other person, oh, I actually don't know how to respond to that. That is actually okay. Because now the other person sees, oh, hey, this person's actually listening to what I think. It's not just pro-life and pro-choice yelling at each other. It's a person trying to understand what I think and why. And they're not being snarky. They don't pretend that they know everything. They just want to talk to me. And that is super, super powerful.
Pastor Jay has a secret weapon.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's great. You feel free to say that in a conversation. You don't have to know everything. All right, and then finally bring it back to what is the unborn. We're trying to prove that the unborn are human beings, and human beings deserve human rights. We're not trying to prove that the foster care system isn't broken or that the world isn't overpopulated. Don't get distracted. Ask yourself, assuming their concern is correct, does that justify killing human beings? And then use the common ground analogy question tool to bring it back to the unborn. So hopefully these tips will give you a good starting point to have conversations about abortion. And these take practice, so remember, it's okay if you don't remember everything right away. It's okay if you get stumped and have to admit you don't know something or need to do some more research. The best way to learn this material is by trying it in a conversation and learning from the conversations that you have. All right, so once we learn how to talk about abortion, we need to actually go and do it, because it doesn't really do a ton of use just to be like, I know how to defend the unborn. And then you go home and watch a movie. Not that you can't do that, because that's also fun. But you need to actually use what we're learning. And so we can have conversations with just like your friends and family. So specifically, you can take a moment to pick an individual in your life to talk about abortion with in the next week. And if you have paper and a pencil, as you all do, you can write down their name and the day you want to have this conversation. just to like to hold yourself accountable to it and to actually try to make a difference. All right, so this may seem challenging and impossible, but your conversation doesn't have to be perfect. The first step is just simply having a conversation. To help start the conversation, you could even bring up this presentation and say something like, I was listening to a talk the other day about abortion, and it was really interesting. It made me wonder what other people thought about it. Like, what do you think about abortion? And I promise it's not as weird as it seems like. We're like, oh, that's so weird. Or just be like, oh, hey, what do you think about it? It's not. And starting this conversation will likely go best if you give a quick transition from whatever you're talking about to abortion, like we just said, followed by some sort of like open-minded question. Yeah, a lot of this is kind of repetitive. All right. Yeah, and additionally, initiating this conversation will help let your friends and family know that you are open to conversations about abortion in the future. Yeah, especially people in your lives that may be susceptible to having one at some point, to just start that conversation with them. And even if they won't get to a point where they admit that it's always wrong, sometimes people will say that, you know, I don't think I would personally have one, but I think it should be legal. All right. We don't want people to ultimately have that stance, but at least the more people that admit that they won't personally have one, the more children that will be saved. So it's, even this incremental work is valuable. It is saving people's lives. But the more that we do, the more that we can get closer to having a world where abortion is unthinkable. And that's possible. I know that it seems like a goal that's so far out there, and in many ways it is. You know, it might take another 50 years to overturn Proposal 3 or more, or whatever. But, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yes, that's what I was going for. Yeah, slavery. That was something that was so ingrained into our society for so many years. That, you know, that if you're a certain skin color, we can just enslave you. We own you now. And that was just so, it was very ingrained into our culture. Everyone thought that was okay. But then now, if you walk around people on the street like, hey, do you think that slavery is okay? They're gonna be like, no, why would you even ask me that? Of course I think it's wrong. It'll take a long time, but we can get there. Especially if we're focusing on human rights, people, especially nowadays, that's really a big conversation to have. All right.
Question.
Yes.
If you ever use the argument, somebody's challenging you, thinks that abortion is fine, it's wonderful, you know, how would you feel if your mother aborted you?
Sometimes that works with people, but honestly, a lot of the times people, especially around like the college age, they will either say this to be snarky or because they genuinely are facing stuff like depression. Like, actually, I do wish my mother aborted me. Or let's say, like, if she was going through a hard circumstance, I hope that she would. People say that all the time. And so sometimes that can be helpful in conversations, but oftentimes a lot of people will still just dig into that and you'll be able to see that hurt a bit more. But yeah, so I don't genuinely try to use that very often, but it can be effective depending on the person. So yeah, any other questions? That was really gonna be my next thing. Yes?
So in this case right now, you can write to Grace because we're sending one check to Protect Life Michigan. You have a indicator when we do send checks to Protect Life Michigan directly. How do we do that? What is that?
Yes, so I have some donation cards over at the table over there that I can give you if you're interested. And so you can set it up online or like send it via mail. With how to set that up, again, I'll just talk to you separately, or I have a postcard for it. Oh, yes, how do you indicate it for me? Yes, so when you send it to the organization overall, you would have a little code in there to put anywhere in the comments. If you put 1922, that's my code, so that they know that it goes towards like my role specifically. And I don't know if I talked about this earlier, but my role at Protect Life Michigan is that I am the campus activist at Grand Valley. So I'm responsible for equipping the group there with everything that they need to reach the entire campus with the pro-life message every year. And there are other campus activists across the state at other different colleges doing the same work there, just as a FYI. Right. Any other questions, whether about Protect Life Michigan or any other thing about abortion? Or like, you know, someone brought up this argument one time and I just don't know how to respond to it. Yeah.
Is
act of an abortion for people? Do they respond? I mean, I know it's grotesque and such. Is there a role for that?
Yes, absolutely. So in our handouts that we give people, which are on, they're those blue square ones on the table. Oh, yes. Is there ever a place for like describing the process of an abortion? Is that, yeah. Absolutely. That is something that we bring up. Because a lot of people think of abortion as just stopping a pregnancy and they don't really understand what happens. And so in our handouts that we give people during our outreaches, they're the blue squares on the table. When you open it up, you do see images of aborted children, and it is graphic. Some of our displays that we use, so we have a bunch of different ones. We have different table displays, other like outdoor ones, like the flags that you can see that show like the number of children who've been aborted, but also on the right, you can see a picture that we use images of abortion victims in our displays. Because that is honestly what gets so many people to realize that this is what is going on. Like, it's one thing to intellectually be like, oh yeah, they're a person and maybe it kills them or something, but to see that it breaks your heart, and your heart needs to break, honestly, to really understand what's going on. But yeah, and you absolutely can describe abortions to people. Sometimes when I'm having a conversation with someone, I'll ask if they've ever seen a picture of a child who's been aborted. A lot of times they'll say no. And then when they do see that, they will just change their mind. Oftentimes they'll change their mind. There's a study done by that same organization, Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform, that 67% of people who just look at images of aborted children will change their, they feel more negatively about abortion. Which, like, after you see a picture like that, how could you not? But it's probably the biggest thing that shows people that this is actually what abortion does, is that it is violent against children. And you look at other issues like with slavery or just civil rights in general. Like I'm assuming you know the story of Emmett Till, where he was a black child who was visiting the South with his family, and he allegedly whistled at a woman in the shop, and some men lynched him. And his mother insisted on an open casket funeral, and his face was just grossly deformed. But she insisted on an open casket, and that's honestly what that sparked a big part of the civil rights movement. People saw oh, this is actually what's going on. This is that ugly and grotesque. And so while seeing these images does hurt to look at, that's what makes people see it. I have a friend, her name was Avery. She was a pro-choice student at Grand Valley last year, and she saw these images on Instagram and then came to our one of our meetings on campus to hear this exact same presentation that you just did. And she changed her mind on abortion and became a member of our group. But the biggest thing for her was to see that picture. And there's another story recently where a girl also saw images like that online, and her friend was pregnant, and everyone was pressuring her to get an abortion, but she was the only person to stand up for her. And because the mother didn't want to get an abortion, but her parents and her boyfriend were pressuring her into it, but she was the only one standing by her because she saw those images, and she was like, I don't want that baby to be hurt. But yeah, the procedure for an abortion is violent. There's a few different kinds. There's the pill, which basically just suffocates the child in the womb. There's, when they get a little bit older, they have to dismember them alive in the womb, either through suction or just ripping them apart, which is the hardest, they're the hardest things to look at, but that's actually what happens. And then when they're too old, even for that, they're too big, they are given a lethal injection, and then the mother gives birth to them stillborn. Yes?
I've heard stats before, but they're a plug in my mind. Mm-hmm. The percentage of abortions in this country performed on African American women, can it be a civil rights issue? Yeah, I mean, I think, so it's been 60 million children have been killed by abortion since Roe v. Wade was passed was decided in 1973, and 20 million of those have been black children. That's roughly 33%?
Yeah, 33%, and there's only, I don't know what the percentages have been throughout the past 50 years, but right now, like 13% of people in the US are black, but 33% of all abortions have been black children.
Civil rights issue.
Yeah, exactly, it is. I mean, this whole thing is a civil rights issue, but if you're focusing on that too, people don't like that. People are usually not in favor of sex-selective abortions or race-selective abortions because they recognize that, like, oh, that's not okay, but then they'll say that it's okay to kill people. So a lot of the times bringing up those statistics make people think, like, rethink about what's going on here. So yeah, that's a great point. And also, yeah, most children who've been aborted are also women, or because little girls are not really. Yes, that is still, we talk about how we've got like feminism now and all that stuff, but still most aborted children are women. I assume I'm going past time.
You're right at it now.
Right at it? Okay.
I just want to make a couple comments quickly. First of all, thank you very much for coming. I assume you're not on a tight schedule. You can stay and talk to people afterwards?
Yes, I can. I have a little bit of time.
Okay. Carol, I want to thank you also for bringing Making Life Disciples to us. You can talk more to Carol or Leslie or Becky or Joni or I. That was also very helpful in terms of apologetic, learning more, also connecting with resources. That C-Baby app, you should all go and download that because you can, how far along are you? Let me show you, Planned Parenthood does not want those women to see their ultrasounds and, boom, you can show them. We also have a wonderful booklet for women before you decide, and for men before she decides. And I got some of those. You can access those when you have someone specifically that you want to talk to. We went to the March for Life, Tom and I. Who else? Joni, sorry. I know. Well, she's only my wife. 1973, Roe v. Wade, people thought, okay, there's no way we're going to overturn that. It happened. Prop 3, there is a lawsuit that's very complex trying to overthrow that. Personally, I don't see that it's going to work, but I understand any effort to overturn it is great. But we must change hearts and minds in Michigan, regardless of whether laws get changed. If you don't change hearts and minds, they'll just change the laws back.
Yeah, and actually, Proposal 3 in Michigan was, it's decided by popular vote.
Exactly.
And in order to overturn it, we need another constitutional amendment to the same thing. So we can't get rid of it until we change people's minds.
Yeah, so thank you so much. We need your work. Appreciate it. Again, I don't apologize for offering opportunities to fund people and ministries that we think are valuable, but we each need to decide, financially what we can support and what we have to say no to. So I think this is worthy. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, again, thank you for Protect Life Michigan. Thank you for Sarah's presentation. Lord, it was fantastic. We need this work. Thank you that we belong to a church that takes the Bible seriously and that takes our creation and our Creator seriously, and so defends and speaks for life. And just help us to continue to be better equipped to do that. For Jesus' sake, amen. Thank you. You'll stick around. You can also talk to Carol a little bit more. Yeah.